My name is Yusuf, Muslim Eneborg. You can just call me Yusuf. I think that'll be fine. I know the thing is everybody able to see the PowerPoint presentation? I'm thinking about you there in the corner. Can you see? Yeah? Okay. I'm going to go ahead and start this presentation. As you see, the title of the talk is called Discovering Paradise Lost. Hopefully, by the end of this talk, you should have some idea of what I'm talking about. Hopefully. But if you don't, still, it's all good. Let me start with something that maybe some of you will be familiar with. I'm not sure, but I've always loved maps. Ever since I was a little kid, I used to always draw maps and stuff. And this was a map that was hanging at my grandfather's house. I used to stare at it for ages. I used to just love looking at it. Any of you familiar with this map? Have you seen anything, this map or anything close to it? I think maybe a lot of you have, especially from the subcontinent. So it's a map of the Muslim world. Like I said, I spent a lot of time staring at this map, and I've thought about it a lot as well throughout my life, because it had such an imprint on me at a young, impressionable age like this, just this, this image of the Muslim world. I could talk about a lot of different things about this map, and I have done in different talks. But here, I want to just start with asking you guys, do you see anything strange about this map? Go ahead and just blurt it out if you see anything really strange about this map. Does it look okay? Does it look normal? Anything? Sorry?
Yeah, size of Africa.
Whoa, okay, that's a good one. So we've got one suggestion here, which is that the size of Africa is disproportionate to the size of other countries on the map.
Well, India has not got any Muslims.
India's got hardly any Muslims, according to this map. Yeah.
Hardly any Muslims.
Yeah. That's true. Yeah. Even China looks like sort of not really. Any more suggestions? Anything more? Anybody want to say about this map? Can everybody see the map? Can you see what it is? So as you see on this map, they've sort of separated or made divisions of the world according to how many Muslims live in these particular countries by ratio, by percentage. One thing that I want to point out to you, which is very striking about this map, is that it's actually inspired or copied from a very earlier map by a Christian missionary in 1908, Samuel Zwemer. As you can see, this is a small cutout of it. It's a similar type of, distinction of the various, dividing Islam according to population and things like that. Obviously, this says a lot about how deeply we have appropriated the Orientalized understanding of the religion, the reification of religion and all that. And all of that stuff is really interesting. And that was actually going to be my first talk. But then I was cautioned because of occupational hazard being an academic, that it would have been too academic, too boring, too dry. So I changed it up a little bit. And I do want to actually focus on the map itself. I don't want to talk about this sort of idea of the Muslim world, although that's a very fascinating topic. But something that map represents, this idea of Islam, of Muslim, which is framed within this particular depiction of the world, which, as somebody already pointed out, is a biased one. It's something that depicts the world in a certain way, not necessarily the accurate way. For example, this, to me, is a much more suitable map for South Africa. Top and center, top and middle, the top and center of the world, much bigger, and Sweden, as you see, squashed there at the bottom. That's much more, I think, appropriate for this type of a situation. So the thing is, I think the first time I came to South Africa, one of my friends had asked me to get him this map. He thought it would be everywhere in South Africa, and it was nowhere. It was a real, I was completely struck by that, thinking this being such a, post-colonial country and stuff. But anyway, the point I'm trying to make here between these two maps is that neither of them are accurate. This is not a better representation of the world than this one. It's just considering different aspects of measurement. This one is much more focused on shape and direction, while this one is focused much more on size. Now, size is more important for some things, and shape is more important for other things. But obviously, that doesn't mean that, this map, the Mercator projection, this is the original Mercator projection of that map that we're used to now of the world, was made, as you can see, with nautical navigation in mind, how boats sail, the directions they sail. So with that in mind, the map was made in this particular shape, because it didn't skew the lines of navigation. Now, why am I talking about this Mercator projection? Because this world map that we're all used to, that we've all grown up with, which in a way is how we see the world, and I think probably the next generation will be much more Google Map orientated, but for us, this is what we grew up with, is the way we see the world. In a way, it reflects, it's a mirror of our worldview, how we see the world. To go into this a bit more, I just want to show you two maps from the 13th century. One is the European Christian map, over there on the left, and this one over here is from the Muslim world. So these are very similar maps, as you can see. But I could talk a lot about different aspects of these maps and how they represent the cosmology that was understood. But just to sort of get to the point here, we're talking about paradise. In both of these maps, I'm going to get out of the way in a second, I just want to point out that paradise was something that existed on the topography. Like over here, for example, this island here in the east is upwards in this map, in the north, actually represents the Garden of Eden. And there are similar notions within even this map over here. This is supposed to be the surrounding sea. In both of the maps, you have the surrounding sea. And this is supposed to be the mountains of Kaf. And see that opening there? That's also an access point into the world beyond, the earthly. So these maps, the reason I'm talking about them, and the world that they depicted was a world where paradise or heaven was connected to earth much more closely. There was not this strong separation between heaven and earth. For example, there's a story by Qazwini, and he's not the only one, who talks about Alexander the Great crossing over, these islands in the surrounding sea, trying to get to paradise. The Isle of Bliss was one of these pre-paradisical islands, and that would lead to paradise. He lost almost all his men, and he almost died, but he got a glimpse through the mist of heaven. What's that? A pointer. Oh, that's really good. This one? Okay, that's what I mean. Anyway, so these maps were hierarchical also, because as you see here, this is supposed to be the throne of God. Then you've got paradise here, and then over here is Babylon, and then right in the center is Jerusalem, and so forth. Like I said, a lot of things you could say about this map, but just about this idea of heaven. Heaven was seen as something connected to the world. It was either an island, like in this particular depiction, or it was at the furthest edges of the east, and it was where the rivers originated from, the great rivers of the Nile, the Euphrates, the Indus. They were sort of connected. So if you wanted to make your way to paradise, you could physically go to paradise. This is the world, this is the sort of sense we had of the worldview before, in the pre-modern period. Heaven and earth were not that separated. But this starts changing with the early modern period. In this map, for example, one of the most beautiful maps ever created, I think, from the 15th century. Where's this thing again? So here, there's a very strong separation between the earth and heaven. This is heaven, depicting heaven over here. We can go deeper into this, but for now, let's just say that this was sort of a crystallization of something that had been occurring over many, many years, this separation of heaven and earth as two distinct worlds, or two distinct spheres of reality, if you like. And this is something that started in the, already 1,000 years before Christ. It's called the Axial Age, Revolution, and all these things, where all the great religions came about, many of the great ideas, Abrahamic faiths, and so forth. But it really crystallizes by the 15th century, where there's a strong separation between heaven and earth. This leads the way. Yeah, the world, yeah, that's another thing. This leads the way to something that happens even a bit later on, which is the complete disappearance of heaven from the worldview. What does this reflect? A lot of us still believe that there's a heaven, but it's not really within our experience anymore. It's not part of our lives, the way we live them, the way we at least feel we live them. This is a map from, as you see, from the 16th century, and there's no place for heaven anymore. And the world is starting to look a lot more like the world that we are used to. So, obviously, there's by the time you reach what we call the modern period, by the time we reach the 19th century, this is the way the world looks. One really crazy thing about this that I just want to point out, just adding my little post-colonial thing, is that look at the size of Europe, and it's got its own sort of, the world was segmented into different regions. Europe is massive, and it's its own continent. The landmass, the geographical diversity, the cultural diversity, the linguistic diversity of Europe equals that of India and Southeast Asia. They're all more or less same size, same amount of river systems, same, in many, many ways. But whereas India here is almost like just a small little thing sticking out at the bottom of Asia, a bit like Italy is sticking out here at the bottom of Europe. Europe is made into its own world. That's a bit of the sort of thing about this map, is that it's very, Eurocentric in a sense. It's in the middle of the world. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with any civilization will want to put themselves in the middle of the universe. That's just a natural thing. That's the ego thing. We all want to be in the center of the universe. But what is strange about it is that we all accept that. This is the way the world is for us. This is the way we really understand and see the world. As much as we might start understanding, intellectualizing the falsity of this map and all that things, this mirrors the way we see the world. This is how we see the world. An empty place. If you compare this to the earlier depictions, colorful and everything, it's a very different idea. It's all about lines and measurements and, quantification of the world. Again, it has its uses, but what it does is that it makes us see space, as the map reflects, as something that is just an empty container that you can fill with other things, and something to be segmented, broken down. And this is something we've done with time also. Time has also, whereas before time was seen as cyclical and it was injected with other forms of higher time, like Easter in the Christian tradition, or say Laylatul Qadr in the Muslim tradition. It was a time that was closer to eternity. You weren't framed within this one sense of time, this secular time. There was other forms of time that you could access and reach. So both space and time allowed for this sort of fusion of heaven and earth in an earlier sense of how we live our lives. But this has become more and more difficult in the modern world. We live in a secular bubble where earth is very much disconnected from heaven. So it's like you see here with this depiction of the clock. The mechanical clock really represents that idea of time we have now, something as segmented and broken down into various phases. Okay, so why am I rambling on about all this stuff? Fine, it's a bit interesting, but the point I want to get to is that what happened to paradise then? What happened to heaven? Where did it go? Where did it disappear? Shall I be nasty and ask you guys to give me the answer? Anybody got a suggestion? What happened to paradise? Lost. So, who lost it? Where did it go? We still haven't found it? I like that, yeah. Lost from our consciousness. That's a good way to put it, I would say. Yeah? Sorry? Science got in the way. That's interesting also. Science sort of blocked that way of connecting everything. Yeah, there's some... Sorry? Colonization. Do you mean like political colonization? Okay. Surely that had an effect in spreading this worldview, for sure. Any other suggestions?
It went into the theology department.
I love that answer, yeah. It's in the departments, in the theology departments. Great. Okay, well, the amazing thing about this worldview, that we are all in this way of looking at time and space as something empty of quality. It's just something that you quantify. You break down your day. This is the time I eat. This is the time I have to work. Da 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 da. We break it into segments to use as resources rather than giving time and space a quality in itself. So the sense of sacred space, for example, is very hard for us to approach the notion of sacred space as a place being sacred. We might want to connect to it, but it's very hard to connect because we're kind of separated ourselves. So we're not talking about the things we believe more than how we experience the world around us. Now, this worldview that we are all part of, like Sheikh Abdullah was saying in the morning talk, we have to understand our local context. One idea of that local context is which space you find yourself in, which particular culture, which geographical region, but also which time you find yourself in. So we live in a particular time with a particular zeitgeist, a particular way of seeing the world that is not the same as it's always been. That's why we have to understand even our deen in a context that's appropriate for this day and age. You know, some things won't make sense to us because they were said for another context. And if you don't understand that we are in a particular context, we are in a biased way of looking at the world, we won't be able to see that difference. Okay, I'm confusing you guys here. What I'm trying to say is that the way we see the world is a particular model of the world. It's a particular perspective on the world. It's not the way the world is. This is, this is even common knowledge in physics or any real, any scientific profession, that what we're doing is we're creating models of the world. There's no problem in that, like we said earlier. It's just that when we lose the awareness that this is just a way of looking at the world and not the way the world is. So I want to give you this quote that I've sort of condensed from Adnan al-Adnani's book. I think maybe some of you are familiar with it. It's a brilliant book. I have to recommend it. Really, really, it's amazing. If you want to understand, that marriage between science and spirituality. This is from the introduction. So I'll read it out because I've got the mic. Science, or its way of investigating the universe, is an indirect affair. The true nature of the universe is forever unseen to us. We relate to existence through scientific models formulated as representations of natural phenomena that we create. A scientific model is not a physical representation of a real thing. It is a mental, metaphysical image, a mathematical representation of what we think it is. The word theory derives from the Greek theoria, which has the same root as theater, in a word meaning to view or to make a spectacle. Thus, a theory is primarily a form of insight, a way of looking at the world, and not a form of knowledge of how the world is. The interpretations of nature are called theories. They are models, images of the material world made to render it comprehensible and as simple as possible. Ultimately, all scientific models are limited. None of them are the truth. We have different models for reality based on the limits of observation and our intellectual ability. Therefore, scientific models can only be representations of reality and not reality itself. And no matter how well they work or how accurate their predictions under the appropriate circumstances, they should always be regarded as approximations and aids to the imagination rather than ultimate truth. Another way to look at it is that our scientific models are metaphors by which we relate to the world and ourselves. Mistaking the metaphor for true reality has been the bane of both scientific and religious thinking throughout human history. It is when we make the metaphors, we take the metaphors as reality itself, that we get all these issues and complications. Again, coming back to Sheikh Abdullah's notion of differentiated sameness. In one sense, The metaphors are different and they have different uses and they come from different contexts, but what they're indicating, in a sense, is the same. So we have to keep in mind both of these ideas. So I'm going to ask you once again, where did heaven go? This is one of my favorite engravings from the 19th century. It's a representation of Galileo. Let me put it in color for you. Breaking that bubble of that old way of looking at the world as this sort of world, heaven as this dome covering a flat earth, if you like, or whatever. So anyway, what did he do? This is something that I want to show you to bring to your attention. The thing that I really want to leave you with is that why has this model become so important? Why has this way of looking at the world become so ubiquitous, so unanimous? Why do we all accept it so much? Well, one idea is that it's because we see it as taking away all the illusions. That's how it's become such a appealing way of looking at the world. The earlier pictures I showed you, like these ones, had all these different things, If you went into it more, I could show you the tales of like Gog and Magog and Yajuj Majuj and, all these supernatural ideas that we seem to think that we just got rid of. So what we have now, our worldview now, is basically a subtraction of all these illusions. But one idea, anyway, one way of looking at it, is that's not the case. We haven't just broken the illusion and seeing the world more accurately as it is. We're substituting one way of looking at the world, one model, with another model, which seems to us more practical, more useful. So can I ask one more time, what happened to heaven? Sorry? Okay, let me make it easier for you. Okay? What have I been talking about this whole period? I've been talking about time and space, right? But what am I saying about time and space? Somebody tell me that? You look very intelligent there. Marco, what do you tell us? Did you understand what I was talking about? Okay. I've been talking about time and space. I've been trying to explain to you that the way we see the world is a particular perspective on the world. It's not a reflection of reality itself. It's a model we use to come to terms to understand reality. What I'm trying to say to you is that time and space is a figment of our imagination. We construct it. Einstein said it best. How did he say it? Time and space is a thought. I can't remember the exact quote. Does anybody remember? I've got it somewhere. But he was saying that time and space is a process of thinking. It's a model we've created. It's a cognitive projection. It's a figment of our imagination. Or if you want to put it in a more understandable way, it's the goggles that we wear in order to make sense of this world. It's the way we see the world. So, where is heaven? Huh? Everywhere, yeah. Just take off the goggles and it's there. That's all you have to do. You just have to, there's no really discovering Paradise Lost. It's just taking off the covers that's hiding it from right under your nose. That's that. I had a lot more other things, but we're not going to talk about that. I just want to leave you with this quote from Shabistari. Lift yourself above time and space. Quit the world and be yourself a world for yourself. Because in a way, this is what it comes down to. We are each our own universes. And the thing I was going to go into, but don't want to do it now, we haven't got much time, is that this is us. We are that dot. We are the center of our own universe. And you can try and go to the peripheries. Like Shiva said, you can go faster than the speed of light. You can try and, reach beyond the horizon of time and space. But much more easier to just go within. Just to stop, go within, And there you will find, hidden behind that small veneer of time and space, inshallah, heaven, paradise. Thank you. Is it, maybe I can take one or two questions, and then we'll just move on to the next talker, which is Dr. Alia Batul. Is she here?
I hope so. She might be sitting outside.
Okay.
Can somebody go and
She's
get
not-
Batul Khanam?
Yeah. She's on her way, so I'll take questions while she's coming.
Bismillah.
I'll go back to you. That's why I wanted to really get questions, because you had your hand up and I
Abu Bakr.
ignored you. Okay.
Let it be a question and not comments.
I usually don't give comments. Thank you. Yusuf, I think it's an interesting way that you put it across. One would think that in the time of Christianity, there was the idea of heaven as a kind of a political as well as religious sense, which was based on power, and people kind of imbibed that view. So do you not think that secularism was leading to the point where they took out the notions of heaven on the map? Because religion was indicating a different space to politics. So the kind of maps also changed because of the way that people start thinking.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly, that's the point. The point is that what maps show us, more than anything else, is a reflection of how we see the world. Yeah. Especially a world map or a cosmography. That's another interesting thing, is that in that process of secularization, we stopped using the word cosmography for world maps and started calling them geography, or the science of making maps as geography. So that is that, absolutely, it's a reflection of that process of secularization, yeah. Any more questions? No? Did everybody understand what I was saying? Okay, cool. That's reassuring, at least.
Bismillah.
Wow. Do you want me to just keep rambling on, or shall we
Thank
take
you
a break? Or what?
Well, I wanted to know, why didn't you include Idrisi's map? But it would have been just more icing on the cake. Would it have been the same as Qazwini's?
I like Qazwini's more. Idrisi's is also good, but everybody's seen it. So I wanted to show something people haven't seen. Also, there's a lot of good maps. But I thought these two reflected each other. Idrisi's also had a different purpose. This was more like a popular, like what I'm trying to get at is looking at how we see the world. That was a more scientific map, Idrisi's map, in a sense. It was meant more for geography and, navigation, things like that. Whereas these maps, much more, the way we see the world, a reflection of cosmos. So yeah, it's a nice map, but yeah.
Shaykh Allah often reminds us that the Quran, when it describes the people entering paradise, say that we have tasted of this before, we've experienced this before. And as those of you who have heard Shaykh Allah talk often, we are reminded that heaven and hell is right here. And it is how we are in the moment, how we are within ourselves, how we are in our own beingness. And that is why when we get to the other side, as the scriptures describe it, in the Quran at least, it is like, but we are familiar with this. We have been here before. It's because we can taste it here and now. Thank you very much for reminding us that paradise is indeed not lost, but veiled within.
By ourselves.
By ourselves. Thank you very much. Bismillah. Thank you, Yusuf.